What's going on, guys? It's Illuminostic, and I decided to do this live stream tonight because as an ayahuasca facilitator and flow state lifestyle coach, I plumb the depths of my clients' subconscious minds and confront their demons with them. And if people have a particular issue, an addiction or chronic depression or something, it's I need to know about it. And so I've noticed some trends, and the biggest trend, I think, is that porn addiction has become incredibly pervasive. Incredibly pervasive. I mean, it's super, super, super common. And, it really is something that it should be dealt with in pretty much exactly the same way as any other type of addiction. There are two major contributors that create the fertile soil that addictions take root in, and that's trauma and a crisis of purpose. And in our culture, in our modern civilization, what's going on, Devin? Most people have both. And I think actually what we're seeing is generations, at least 2 or 3 generations deep now of this crisis of purpose really being a pervasive circumstance. And it's, I talk about this all the time. It's the number one thing that's destroying the world. And there's just no two ways about it. It's the reason that prescription antidepressants, benzodiazepines, and SSRIs, are so. I mean, so many people are on them. The oceans test positive for benzodiazepines. And so, the solution to that, as research has shown, is transcendental states. And when you use that word, I think a lot of people will kind of bristle a little bit, especially if you're a person who is less inclined to, woo and whatnot. But the reality is it's a flexible term, and you can understand the idea of a transcendental state in a lot of different ways, and people do. Some people take psychedelics and they decide they believe in God. Some people take psychedelics and they believe that there is some kind of intrinsic intelligence in the world around them. Some people take psychedelics and suddenly just relate to the world in a more meaningful way, and all of that is transcendental. So if you are in one state of mind and you're elevated to another state of mind that's more productive and more interesting and more positive and more fruitful, and there's more appreciation and gratitude, this is a transcendental state, right? It's that simple. By the way, you guys, do me a favor and hit the like button and share these videos with anyone that you think might benefit with them. And let's be honest, that would be anyone on earth pretty much, right? So there's that. And then we still have 2 spots at the retreat that we're trying to fill in October. And you can come at any point during the month. So you don't have to come for the whole month. You can come for 3 days, 5, 10, whatever. So putting that out there that we need to fill that. But I want to talk about the real dangers and the real impact of porn addiction that a lot of people are not really aware of, I don't think. And it's my hope that anyone that hears this that might not be taking this seriously will actually be inspired to at least cut down their screen time, because there really are just so many levels of ramifications to this kind of behavior. On the one hand, it's good that our society has moved away from judgment. We have kind of escaped from the constraints that were imposed on us by this religious, the predominant religious culture, I guess, in the United States and many other places. But, what happens when the pendulum swings too far in one direction is that we overcompensate, right? So I think, when people kind of realized that the judgment and the general attitude of religion towards these things was ridiculous and corny and outdated, we let our guard down a bit too much. And then it's always a perfect storm, right? When you couple the fact that we have a more permissive atmosphere with the easy access circumstance, and then all of that is catalyzed by the crisis of purpose and generational trauma that's being passed down. It's just a pretty terrible recipe. And it turns out that the state of mind and the emotional and psychological conditions that leave one predisposed to and vulnerable to this type of addiction create a vicious circle, right? So, for example, and this is going to apply mostly to men because we're the ones doing the pursuing most of the time. And, I hate to talk like this because I know that in a lot of people's minds, it's kind of an antiquated way of thinking. But if you look around the world, that's still how things seem to be, But, it seems to me that men in general are motivated to succeed in large part by the pursuit of women. And there's sort of this criteria that the more successful you are, and this can be in different departments, right? So it can be that your personality is fantastic. It can be that you are physically dashing and powerful. It can be that you are hilarious. You may have mastered an instrument. There's all these different ways to make yourself appealing. But the reality is that now guys can just take their phone and they can pull up a woman that is so far out of their league in their current state that they should never, ever, ever be seeing them naked. They have not earned that privilege. They have not put in the work. They have not transformed themselves. You know what I mean? They have not sculpted their body. They have not made a fortune. They have not mastered an instrument or some kind of skill that makes them attractive, whatever it is. There's a lot of different ways to do it. But now they're able to bypass that. And of course, it's not the same. It's not, the accomplishment is gone, and it's not the same thing, but it can act as a replacement for the actual success. And so what I'm suggesting is that the actual motivation to become extraordinary in your real life can be detracted, to put it mildly, by access to that type of pornography. And really, I think that that's probably the most destructive element of it. I mean, video games are just as bad when it comes to just loss of human productivity. I'm really lucky in the sense that I was sort of born with a sense of purpose. And I always had this, and also we had no media in our house. We had no computers, we had no internet. I never developed the habit of watching television. But I've always felt motivated, if I'm wasting time, that's like the most shameful thing I can do, right? I could be playing the guitar. I could be writing something. I could, you know what I mean? There's always something productive to do. So I actually have probably an unreasonable amount of self-loathing if I do something stupid like play a video game. But all this stuff has become so normalized in our society because people have no purpose. Very often, when you look at the mainstream in a place like the United States, it seems to me that the overwhelming majority of the, bottom rung of the middle class basically are just spinning wheels until they die. And so pornography and video games, the screen time, the hours of productivity that are lost, the talents that will never be discovered, those things are a tragedy, and they come at a tremendous cost, and it's terrible. But I think the psychological impact of this like sexual bypassing, where you can sort of access these women without having to do it in real life, is probably part of the reason why we're seeing the degradation of the male of the species to the degree that we are. They don't actually have to do it for real. you can pretend, you know? And so the trick and the only real solution is to reorient priorities. And what I've discovered working with psychedelics, there's really no better way to reprogram and reorient a person than psychedelics. And part of that is that when you're trying to convince someone, or someone is trying to convince their self, there is a malleability of will. They can be evasive. They can get out of it. They can, ignore it. They can do use all these different devices to evade the confrontation of this thing. But if you can get someone that has a problem to sit still and take a powerful psychedelic, they no longer have a choice. They no longer have an option. And the other real power here is that a lot of the crisis of purpose, I think, comes from contracted awareness, right? People don't know about the possibilities that are available to them out there in the universe. They don't have an awareness of the depth of the mystery and the, profundity of the mysteries. And they may have not had the opportunity or the motivation to become fascinated with the mystery. And they also may not have realized that the mystery is interactive, that it's not actually inert and soulless, that your experience of life can become a dialogue with something wholly other and yet not, right? And the psychedelic experience puts that person in that awareness, whether they like it or not. And there's really, like Thomas Paine said, once a mind becomes enlightened, it can't really go back into the darkness. So once you have become aware of all this greater potential, it's almost harder to return to those old habits and self-destructive behaviors than it is not to. Because, now the parameters of what's available to you to experience, your options have changed. There is more on the menu. You're not limited now to Minecraft and Pornhub. You realize that there are vast expanses in your mind and your soul and your being. Oftentimes with psychedelic therapy, people develop an ability to express themselves in new ways. A lot of my clients end up becoming musicians. They might start singing or pick up the guitar. In at least one case that I can think of, the person had no hobbies that I'm aware of and went home from the retreat and built something like a table or something, started playing guitar and singing, and wrote a children's book, and all in the space of 30 days or something. So, it's really just a matter of taking the first step, of realizing that a person that is trapped in an addiction is self-imposing limitations. And those limitations are very easily transcended with a simple decision. And that simple decision is just to take a step, and then another step, and then another step. In fact, what's going on, Heather Jones? Hit the like button, you guys. I see 10 people and only 4 likes. Really doing everything I can to grow this channel right now. I have some really good videos. I hope people think they're good anyways. Coming up, Robert Anton Wilson offering a scientific explanation for the mechanisms behind synchronicity that I think will fly, isomorphic resonance, and the implicate and explicate order, Bohm's ideas and whatnot. So it's really just a massive undertaking. It's taken me forever. And then also tomorrow, my music channel, I have a reaction to Doing That Rag by the Grateful Dead. That is actually an analysis with explanation of all the hidden meanings in the lyrics and whatnot. So if you're not following Trip Tracks 1111, you should do that as well. But yeah, so where there's a will, there's a way. And it's really just a matter of establishing a kind of sense of purpose, and also oftentimes building up the self-esteem and the confidence. People have a different set of challenges in the modern world, right? I just based on my own observation. I mean, I'm not living in their skin, but just based on my own observation, I feel like there's less opportunity directly presented to people to really develop, confidence and to overcome self-esteem issues. And there's so much more information that makes people feel bad about themselves. The social media comparison toxicity. There's just so many elements that are coming to bear on people in the present moment, that it's really an excellent circumstance and a serendipitous miracle that we have psychedelic medicine to help us to repattern our habits and to re-engineer our own belief systems, and that reminds me of the response that you have to give to people when they say, like, well, okay, I've taken psychedelics and I'm still an alcoholic, or I've taken psychedelics and I'm still addicted to porn, or whatever the case may be. And, that is totally irrelevant if the process was not, ordered and specific. And, if you don't know what you're doing, a tool does no good. If you give a toddler a chainsaw that doesn't even have the strength to pull the cord, doesn't know what to do with it, I'm not suggesting to give it to him running, but you know what I mean. You give somebody a tool they don't know how to use, nothing really productive happens. But there are people that can carve a lifelike statue out of a tree with a chainsaw, So you have to have some idea of what you're doing. You have to go into these sessions with a very clear idea of what your objectives are. This is why before ceremony, you're always setting an intention and making sure that you have a very clear idea of what you hope to accomplish. And it's also really helpful to consider what that's going to entail beforehand as well. So you can create an entire map of the mental processes that you plan to re-engineer in your mind before taking the psychedelic, and then of course there's the possibility of being guided by a shaman or a facilitator if you can afford that or have access to them. But the reality is, if you have some degree of willpower and at least an average intelligence and some kind of sense of responsibility, I wouldn't recommend doing this alone with ayahuasca, but you certainly could use, moderate doses of psilocybin or LSD and pranayama to repattern, reprogram your brain. I actually quit smoking after, I was 30 years old, I think. No, older, 35. So I started smoking. I had my first cigarette when I was like 9 years old. So what is that? 26 years or something off and on. So say, 20 years at least of being a cigarette smoker. And I took 100 micrograms of LSD and I did pranayama for about an hour, which is just a simple practice of breathing in for 4 counts, holding it for 4, breathing out for 4, keeping it distended for 4. And the benefit of this is that you are flooding the brain with oxygen when you're retaining the breath. And this gives it the fuel that it needs to take advantage of the neuroplasticity and neurogenesis that is, conferred by the psychedelic, whether it's psilocybin or LSD, and your brain is able to reorganize itself. And so as you exhale, you're focusing on what it is that you're hoping to release, what doesn't serve you, and maybe focusing on kind of the feelings that are associated with that behavior. And then you keep the breath distended after emptying it all the way down to the very base of the diaphragm. And, you're focusing on what you're letting go as you're exhaling, holding out, and you repeat this cube, the 4-fold breath, as long as you can. And the next day after doing this one time, I forgot that I was a cigarette smoker. I only remembered again because I put my hand in my pocket and I had a pouch of tobacco. So it works, it works. And I think that at least one ayahuasca experience, well, I don't really recommend taking ayahuasca once, but, one run, I guess, at least 3 ceremonies for most people in my experience, close together, in the space of a week, if not back to back. Because I think that experience of the transcendental, again, is essential to, it's an essential component of this work that you're doing. It's great to repattern the brain, and it is absolutely a fact that you are able to change the neural networks in your brain consciously so that it's as if the addiction never existed. That's literally what you're doing. It's no different than changing the programming in a computer. Not at all. Nothing. It's not different at all. It's a biocomputer. It's the same thing. I think it's a little bit hard for people to accept that it can actually be that easy because we've watched people struggle with these things for so long. But I got, news for you guys. This information was actually suppressed. The researchers in the early 1960s never told the government in the United States that psychedelics are dangerous, you should ban them. What they actually said was we can cure every known psychological aberration, oftentimes in a single dose. And the response from the government was to send men with guns to shut the studies down. That's literally what happened. I have to catch myself before I go on another rant about how much social harm and injustice has happened because of the prohibition and the dishonesty on the part of the people that are supposed to protect and serve the citizens of the United States. And what they were actually doing is protecting and serving the corporate overlords. If you think about how effective they are, even in AA, the 13th step was going to be LSD. The guys that founded it, they actually ended up splitting up, and one of the guys left the organization over it because he knew that with psychedelics, AA would actually work. Whereas now, if you go in there and you listen to everyone talk, you're hearing like, well, if you work it, it works. And then people are going around the circle saying, this is my 12th time through the program. I would like to know what exactly their definition of working is. You know what I mean? All of them, 6th time, 7th DUI, 9th DUI, 4th time through prison. If you work it, it works, Yeah, it would probably if there was LSD involved and you could actually change your brain and actually have a transcendental experience, right? Because they say in AA and NA that you have to believe in a higher power. What they're really saying is you have to identify with some kind of purpose. And the problem is that rather than inducing that transcendental experience, they're expecting people to just suddenly believe that it's there if they didn't already. And that's not possible. People need to have an actual experience to catalyze change. That's the facts. And that is one of the main reasons why this works so well. But, as I've been describing, it's a double whammy. It's incredible how these things are engineered so that they just coincidentally, I guess, have as part of their functional basis, the ability to make the brain malleable so it's ready for a new imprint, but then they also open up a gateway into a transcendental space. So, that combination of circumstances is what allows you to change your life, to rewrite your story. And the reality is you can even rewrite your past. You have to be very difficult with this. And there's a reason why a shaman is a shaman, a real shaman. You can write chaotic programs, right? If you don't have the skill to maintain focus at higher doses. That's why for the novice, it's not really necessary to take really high doses. All you need is to get in there deep enough that you can have some idea of what the transcendental experience is and to create that malleability in the brain. That's all that's necessary for therapeutic work. You don't really need to go to the nth dimension. Although I do recommend that for people that are properly prepared, of course. What's up, Jonathan Chapin? I haven't seen you in a minute. Did you miss my cigarette story? Because I did already go through this, but I'll explain it again real quick. You take about 100 micrograms of LSD, or probably, I don't know, 1.5 grams of cubensis mushrooms, maybe a little bit more. No, half an eighth should do it. And then use pranayama, where you're focusing on the pattern that you're trying to write on the inhalation. You're holding the breath, retaining the breath for a count of 4, while focusing on the new imprint, exhaling for a count of 4 until all of the air is gone, focusing on what you're trying to release, the feelings associated with it, and then keeping the breath distended for a count of 4. And I did that for an hour or two. I didn't even sleep that night as well. This was like 11 in the morning after an entire night of not sleeping. And the next day, I didn't even know that I smoked cigarettes until I found my tobacco in my pocket in the evening. And, the first thing I would do, it works. This is like, it blows hypnotism out of the water. And I think it's difficult for people to wrap their minds around the implications of this in terms of personal freedom, in terms of the potential to liberate the human race. And that may sound dramatic, but if you're watching my channel, you probably have an idea that it is at that juncture where, it's that severe. Because if we're able to re-engineer our own consciousness, and we are no longer dependent upon whatever we're addicted to or trapped in our beliefs, what is there to stop us from becoming independent? And this is why I'm always saying that, the real power of gnosis, of spiritual development, of psychedelics, is the fact that once people have developed themselves sufficiently, it's not necessary to rule them, and they will not tolerate it to be governed, and that is, again, another reason why psychedelics were actually outlawed. That's why they were banned. It was not to protect people. It was never to protect people. It was actually the opposite. It's everything they can do to ensure that you're dependent upon the medical system, that you're dependent upon the drugs, that you are hypnotized by the television, that you are addicted to porn, whatever it is that is going to keep you mindless and consuming. That's the program. That is actually the program. And we have the keys to the door that lets us out of these matrix engineered, mind forged manacles. And the thing that is so remarkable too at this juncture, I mean, I've known this the first time I took LSD. I was 15 years old or something. I think I was 14 or 15. And I like 2 hours into it, I told my friend, you could probably treat every mental illness, addiction, everything with these things, I mean, I knew right away what they were for. And also that the transcendental experience that they offer is legitimate as well. And so did a lot of other people, But we were mocked and ridiculed and jailed and persecuted and ostracized for decades and decades and decades. And now we have proof. Now we have Johns Hopkins and Princeton University and Harvard and all of the rest of the institutions confirming, actually beyond our expectations, the efficacy of these compounds for all of the purposes that we've claimed. In fact, if you watch my last video about the 13 psychedelic plants that you've never heard of, I was able to give Bill Hicks his dream. Bill Hicks was a comedian that died of cancer. He introduces the song Third Eye on Tool's Enema. He said, I wouldn't you like to see a positive LSD story on the news sometimes? So I put that bit from his stand-up in there and then put a positive news story. And the newscaster actually said, LSD and other psychedelics, researchers have shown that they cause higher states of consciousness. She actually used those words. that I couldn't believe. That really shocked me to hear them actually put it in those terms, this state of higher consciousness. So, 9:00, I'm keeping it short tonight, guys, because I'm trying to really get serious about music again. And so it's practice time for me. But I just wanted to pop on here and just put this out there for anybody that might need to hear it or know somebody that needs to hear it. That the solution is to identify with some purpose. You have to find your purpose. You have to overcome the proclivity to be vapid. You have to, discover your purpose and identify with it completely. That's the only way to be happy. No one on this earth is happy unless they do that. I mean, there might be some people that are just, I'm sure there are some bliss bunnies here and there. It doesn't matter what's happening. They're just happy. But in general, the overwhelming majority of us have to be identified with some kind of purpose in order to really be fulfilled. Otherwise, you're a non-playable character, literally. So if you're not an NPC, then you have to have some kind of, identify with some kind of purpose. Otherwise, you're going to be miserable and you're going to be on drugs and you're going to have your junk in your hands, staring at your phone. And that's it, And if you're having trouble getting dislodged and you're stuck, don't be afraid of psychedelics. They're not going to harm you unless you're predisposed to mental illness. Then you might have some issues. That definitely happens. But by and large, this is a viable option for anyone that needs to overcome depression, addiction, anxiety, PTSD, crisis of purpose, any of that stuff and all of that stuff. Know thyself is the maxim of all the great thinkers throughout history. And so that's where it starts. That's where it begins. Well, Oracle, I have definitely seen improvements in people with both of those conditions. We had an autistic client here recently, and he definitely had a pretty positive experience, I think. So, yeah, I mean, autism is definitely one of those things that psychedelics correct. In fact, there's a video somewhere on YouTube where there was a kid that was really badly autistic and he wouldn't even look anyone in the eye and he didn't speak, and they gave him psilocybin and now he looks people in the eye and he talks. He's not 100% cured yet. Right on Grandis Utu. He's not 100% cured, but he speaks. He didn't even speak. They gave him psilocybin. He speaks, So, don't impose limitations on what can come from these experiences because we really don't know. I mean, there have been at least 2 people in a clinical setting that spontaneously went from low IQ to genius after taking LSD once. You just don't know what's going to happen. So you need to be responsible and know what you're doing. Seek the proper professional guidance if necessary. But aside from that, good travels, guys. And I hope this is of some service to you. Please do join my Patreon because I'm demonetized and I get nothing for these streams. And so it's nice if you guys show some kind of appreciation. You can also make a one-time contribution to the addresses in the chat. And also we have 2 spots open in our retreat, and that is the best way to support us because this is our last round and we would really like to fill up and have a great finale. And then unfortunately we're leaving the Amazon rainforest for a while. Doubt forever, but for a year or so to try to go out to the coast. And I'll be posting lots of surfing videos. But yeah, thank you guys so much for spending this time with me, and I'll see you again tomorrow night. I'm going to eat a pretty significant dose of psilocybe subcubensis and get my guitar out and rage it for a few hours. So I'll see you tomorrow.